Kia ora koutou, namaste, assalamu alaikum, ni hao, and a big welcome to our elected members, council staff enabling this webinar, and most importantly, to our community who are joining us via Skype. The substantial reduction in non-rates revenue to the tune of $500 million means that Te Kaunihera o Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland Council, needs to balance providing essential projects and services while taking decisive steps to reduce the pressure on residents and businesses facing economic hardship. Just over a week ago, Auckland Council launched a 3-week consultation on the emergency budget and what impact certain decisions will have on our region. The consultation is essential as it provides you, our community, with an opportunity to have your say about what essential services, facilities, projects and programs you would like to see prioritised. Our session this evening, which will take about 90 minutes or less if not needed, will be recorded and will be made available on our website alongside questions and responses. If you've not already done so, please ensure you make a submission at akhaveyoursay.nz/emergency-budget. I'd also like to take this opportunity to encourage you to share the link with your family and friends. We'd love to hear from you. On tonight's panel, we have Councillor and Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore, Franklin Ward, tēnā koe, kia ora Bill. Councillor Paul Young, Howick Ward, ni hao, Huan Ying, Paul. Councillor Sharon Stewart, Howick Ward, good evening to you, Sharon. Andrew Duncan and David Gurney, our finance subject matter experts. My name is Eri Tuiavi'i, Democracy Services. It's my pleasure to be your facilitator this evening. Before I hand over to our subject matter experts for our presentation, Councillor Cashmore, I wondered if you might be able to address this one for me, as I see that it's dominated social media, my feed anyway, among peers and friends and family since the consultation started. And that's some of the, I guess it's one of our FAQs as well, and that's, you know, if people would just take a pay cut, we could somehow claw back that 525 million. Now, I know that there's a presentation from our subject matter experts, but in community engagement, I've noticed that some of these are the top of mind things, and if we can sort of just park them before our kōrero, that would be great. So, Councillor Cashmore, any thoughts on that, please, from you?
Good evening, everybody, and thanks, Eddie, and thank you for the question. A lot of people assume that you can just slash and burn salaries to save $500 million. Council's total salary bill is not double that. So you'd actual fact have to be let go half our staff, which means you would let go half the capability, half the services, and half the need provision that's enabled by those staff. So although staff salaries and staff headcount is part of the solution, and we've signalled that well and clearly through this consultation, it is not the answer. That is overly simplifying the facts. We have a whole of $525 million potentially in our budget. I think it's important that people realise that this is a forward-looking budget. It is not tracing economic activity in the past. This is a projected budget. So there's a lot we don't know, and these are extremely unusual times. No one has lived through these types of times, arguably since the Great Depression. So we don't know how long COVID's going to last. We don't know how big the hit's going to be. Maybe we're over projecting it. Maybe we're undershooting it. But we are taking the most likely scenario, and the recipe we've put forward in the presumptions and in the analogies that are in these emergency discussion documents are about, okay, these are based around what we think will happen, and these are the things that we believe we need to do to, one, continue providing as many essential and social services as council can. Two, to keep a capital program up and going that enables us to deliver the things that Auckland still needs. And three, to put us in a position that when things do start to improve, we are ready to capture that moment and move forward with greater speed and precision. Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you, Councillor. Very helpful. Thank you for your response. Councillor Stewart, I know that we don't have the granular level of detail and that the governing body is yet to deliberate and have a dialogue and decide on some of these things, but are you aware of any projects in sort of your community or your ward that might potentially be affected by this budget? And if not, are there any general sort of more broader observations about what's potentially at stake if Aucklanders don't get out and tell us what they'd like to see prioritised? Councillor Stewart.
maybe some of the Eastern Busway, but we're actually waiting for the shovel ready to come, confirmation from central government, and then we'll know. But first of all, I'd like to thank all of you that have taken part in this. These are, as the Deputy Mayor said, they are very difficult times. We're in extreme conditions, and you know, today I think we really need to listen to what you have to say, and there are probably some places that we may be able to cut some money, and maybe some of the ideas that you may give us some of that guidance. But as far as the wages, the staff earnings are concerned, so far over anybody over 100,000, they've been asked to take a reduction in their wages, and most of those have, as have the elected members, and that's something that's just been worked on at the moment. But really, as far as the staff's concerned, we as a council and the mayor, we can't actually tell the staff to take those reductions. That's something that the city manager has to discuss with the staff, because legally we can't make people take a reduction in their wages, but that's something that has to be worked through. But there has been about 1,100, I think it's, yeah, about 1,100 people have lost their jobs, and there's going to probably be further with restructuring. So yes, so thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I've got a follow-up question that I'd like to ask, but I've got our fabulous subject matter experts here who have alerted me that a total of 868 people have taken up the salary reduction, of which 32 are actually under the 100k threshold. So the total commitment will be in about 2.8 million over the next 6-month period. Councillor Stewart, before I move on to Councillor Young for a brief comment, I know that Councillor Cashmore has joined us for all the other webinars that we've had, so he's answered this really, really well, and I've loved some of the responses, all of the responses that he's given. I heard you mention, Councillor Stewart, that it's important to hear from our community. Could you elaborate on that, Councillor Stewart? Why is it important for you as an elected member to hear from our community at large?
Well, I think we just need to listen to them, but I have been disappointed over the last few years. We haven't had as many people that have taken part in the have you say, but this is probably the most important have you say that we've ever had, because of the extreme things that are happening with COVID-19 and with the water crisis. And we really do need to hear from the community. We're not really supposed to be leading you and telling you what to say. You're supposed to be, you know, we've given you this consultation document. I'm very happy to meet with anybody. If you know, if anybody wants to meet with me, they can email me, and I'm quite happy to sit down with people. And I think it's much easier to do that than to do it over, you know, as we're doing now. I think there's a lot more people that would like to be consulting with us and telling us what they expect from us, but because of COVID-19, it hasn't been able to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Young, what might some top of mind things be for you concerning the emergency budget that you'd like for your Hauk community or your wider ethnic community to consider? Any words to encourage them to have a submission and have a say, or anything else that's top of mind for you before we hand over to our subject matter experts?
Thank you very much, particularly for all the staff and my fellow councillor. And now Auckland actually face the most serious time, because everybody know, particularly our council lose the revenue, and the really tough decision ahead for the council. And we need to review and recover the work for everybody. Well, we know that's quite a big proportion migrant Asian people, particularly in my East Auckland. That's quite a lot of the migrant. And through the consultation, that's two aiming. First of all, we will, as the Councillor Stu and the Deputy Mayor just mentioned about that we want to listen from the people and get advice, and that we can consider what's the tough decision we are going to make for all the Auckland. Secondly, that's also the opportunity for the migrant, particular people, doesn't used to not engage our Auckland Council. No, that's our city, what challenge we face, and how we can work together to face the issue and sort it out. And we together can make things different. So particularly in the COVID-19, that's lots of issue. And I think no matter that's Asian, Chinese, migrant, we all part of the Auckland. So let's working together. And as the Sharon just mentioned, we want to listen everybody feedback, because we want all the information, and then we can keep connect through the consultation with our community. Thank you.
Cecilia, thank you, Councillor Young. Well, I see that the message machine is certainly firing up this evening, so without further ado, I'd like to hand across to our colleagues from Finance, our subject matter experts, for a presentation this evening.
Excuse me, Eddie, can I just say one other thing? It's Councillor Stewart here.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Okay, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that 60% of our rates comes from non-rates revenue, and now that the airport shares and Ports of Auckland, we're not going to be getting their dividends, and there's other parts of council that we're not actually getting an income. That leaves about 40% of the income comes from the rates that we take. So we have really got a shortfall of 60%. So these are really difficult times, and you know, and I think everybody's got to understand this is going to be one of the most difficult budgets that we have ever had to make. And you know, so that's why I think it's really important that we hear from our community and what they think is really essential. And I think for most people it's core business, and I'd like to hear from people what they think is the core business. Just one other thing, you might be wondering why I'm having to hold my glasses. I had a bit of a fall and I've got a problem with my glasses resting on my nose, so that's why I'm having to do that, so I apologise for that. But anyway, I will hand it back to you, Eddie, but I think it's really important that everybody understands that this is an extreme time, and we do only have 40% of our rates take as you know, and the staff can correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you very much, Councillor Stewart. I probably couldn't have created a better segue even if I tried. Great segue to hand it over to Andrew Duncan from Finance.
Good evening. So we consulted with you in February with a business as usual budget when COVID-19 was out of sight over the horizon. So since that time, the world, New Zealand, Auckland and the Council have been hit by the health and economic effects of the pandemic. Completely unexpected consequences for residents, businesses and the Council in the Auckland region, with unprecedented economic effects. And as Councillor Stewart intimated, we've got a big gap in our forecast revenue for next year. 40% of our revenue comes from rates and the remainder from other sources. And the revenue from other sources, we're expecting that to be down by $550 million next year. As Councillor Stewart said, we won't be getting dividends from the airport or Ports of Auckland, but also we won't be getting revenue from some of our facilities. There will be reduced revenue from public transport fares and from the regional fuel tax. That's having a big effect on us. Fortunately, we started from a relatively strong financial position, but a revenue hit of this scale means that we're going to have to look ahead and do some major changes to what we do to manage our budget. And that's what we're wanting to talk with you about this evening and to get your feedback on. So the Council needs to develop a budget that can manage these impacts, and one that's financially sound, prudent and sustainable into the future. There's a number of different ways that we can achieve those goals. We've got 4 or 5 levers we can pull on to deliver on it. We'll look at the level of our rates increase, how much borrowing we undertake to dispose of assets that aren't being well used, to make savings to our costs and to look at our planned capital expenditure. But in doing that, we've got to recognise our responsibility to maintain the services, the essential services that are the foundation for modern urban living, to consider the impact that COVID-19's had on ratepayers, some of whom will be struggling financially, and the Council's role in stimulating the recovery of the Auckland economy and the businesses and residents that make it up. So if we look at those levers, we start out by thinking about borrowing. So like a household, the Council in the long term, to be sustainable, wants to ensure that its revenues covering its expenditure on a day-to-day basis. So we're looking at borrowing. Ideally, we won't be using borrowing to cover day-to-day expenditure, although that's something we may have to think about and are thinking about just in the short term. Unlike government, we aren't able to go out and borrow a great deal more. We're constrained in what we can borrow. We've been investing heavily in the city's infrastructure in recent years to manage growth and to address historic underinvestment in our city in the infrastructure. We've made some major inroads into addressing both of those issues, but in doing that, we've taken our borrowing ourselves quite close to our borrowing capacity and our limits. And like a householder, when it's looking at mortgages, our lenders will look at our ability to repay our debt, and if we get too close or move past our limits, they'll be looking at the interest costs, and it could affect our capacity to borrow more in the future. We are looking to extend our borrowing a bit, slightly beyond the limits for 1 year. However, this is not something we want to do in the long term, and we also want to make sure we're keeping our AA credit rating and keeping some capacity in reserve for any other unexpected shocks we might confront, and to give us the capacity, if necessary, to make investments in water supply assets to address the drought we're going through if necessary. The Council can also look at its capital expenditure program. We've got a major program going ahead. The proposals in front of you at the moment look at pulling that back a little bit in some of the areas that you've already put some questions through about. Looking at cost savings, we've got a target of $120 million, and both of the rates increase options require some additional savings in that space. Now, this is coming on top of the Council's actions to deliver projected savings over time. Now, in the last 10 years, we've delivered $500 million of savings. We're looking at building on that again this year with $120 million and additional savings under the 2 rates increase options. And this will include things like the staff salaries, some staff reductions, looking at making savings in utility costs, property maintenance costs, and reducing some of our service areas. We can also look at selling some of our $50 billion asset portfolio. So we've got a large portfolio of assets, but some of these aren't particularly well used and aren't necessarily delivering the right outcomes for the community. So by selling some of these assets, it will enable us to continue investment in the things that the Council and the community's identified as a priority. Now, looking at these 4 levers, we've also got the lever of our level of rates increase. So we proposed a 3.5% rates increase in our business as usual budget, but that will no longer deliver the sort of service levels that we were hoping to achieve because of that reduction in our revenue from other sources. We've also got a 2.5% option. Both of these options will require some changes to our investment program, the cost savings I referred to before, asset sales, and reductions in some service levels consequent from the cost savings that we've talked about. The level of the rates increase and how that affects the ratepayers can be seen on, I think, on the next slide. And the next one. So a 3.5% rates increase for the average value property in Auckland, which is about $1,080,000, it's $1.80 a week, or about $95 a year. And that level of rates increase will still be requiring us to make some noticeable changes to service levels in some areas. There'll be a reduction in our capital program, but we still have a reasonably substantial planned capital investment for the coming year. And that'll be $54 million of savings on top of the $120 million I referred to. If we have a 2.5% rates increase, it'll be $1.35 extra a week for the average value property, or another $70 a year, with an additional 25 million of savings and more material effects to some of the services that you're used to, and an extra 60 million reduction in our capital budget. So we've got 4 key levers interacting with 2 options for our level of rates increase. Looking to get your feedback on the proposed rates increases and your questions and feedback on those 4 levers. Our capital investment program, the level of borrowing, the amount of savings we pursue and where we take those from, and asset sales. Now, recognising that our ratepayers were going to be affected by COVID-19, the council's allowed ratepayers who are struggling financially to defer their 4th quarter rates instalment until August this year. But this is only a temporary respite, and many may still be reorganising their financial affairs at that time. So we're proposing to allow ratepayers to postpone next year's rates, and up to $20,000 and up to $5,000 of any rates they've deferred from the 4th quarter for a year, and to have a further year to pay. These caps of $5,000 and $20,000 mean that we'd be focusing our support on small and medium businesses and residential ratepayers. In addition, the council's looking at the accommodation provider targeted rate, which we use to fund visitor attraction and major events, and as the rate applies to hotels, motels, Airbnb properties and the like. And it recovers from these properties our expenditure on visitor attraction and major events. Now, with the impact of COVID-19 on international travel in particular, and in the last few months on events and attractions, we've suspended our spending in the last quarter of the year on this activity, and we're also proposing to reduce the expenditure by 3/4 for the 2021 year. But we will begin that spending again because it's going to be important to revitalising the tourism sector. The rate for the next year will be set to recover that reduced level of expenditure, and we're only proposing to charge it in the 4th quarter of next year, by which time we hope activity will have been able to recommence in the tourism sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. This notion that the split is around about 40% rates versus 60-odd% non-rates revenue, are you able to just talk us through that again? I notice that a question's come up on the question machine there, just a sort of a rough split, or even better, because you know that document like the back of your hand, what page the extra split might be on, Andrew?
Right, I'll find the page that the split is on, which I think is about page, is it 55? You can see our revenue sources on page 57 of the supporting information, which is available on our revenue site, on our website. Rates make up around 40% of our revenue. We get a lot of revenue from other sources. So when you apply for a building consent, you've got a building consent fee. When you build a property, you'll pay development contributions on that to recover the costs of the infrastructure investment the council's putting in to deal with growth. We also receive funding from the New Zealand Transport Agency for part of the construction costs for road and to support public transport. So page 57 of the supporting information, top of the page has got a breakdown of that expenditure. the revenue, sorry.
Thank you, Andrew. Potentially a question again for the SMEs or Councillor Cashmore, if you would. There's a comment/question here about the assumption in the document that our parks and facilities will be used less due to COVID. Due to our imminent move to level 1, why would this be? Isn't this a flawed assumption?
This assumption is looking at how people's behaviour might change as a result of COVID-19. So some people, and not everyone, may be concerned about getting too close to other people in public spaces.
Cool. There's one up there at the top there, Andrew, and I wonder if you might want to answer that, or perhaps the councillors from the ward, and that's the supporting information says that even with a 3.5% increase, not all of the AMETI project, and I looked that up, that's the Auckland Manukau Eastern Transport Initiative and Reeds Road flyover will be undertaken. Then there's a second part there about, more importantly, why would anything be left out of this critical infrastructure for East Auckland? I wonder if any of the councillors have a comment on that. I see that our SMEs are looking at their documents there.
I think it's probably best if one of the council staff can answer that, but I did touch on it before. We're actually waiting for the shovel ready. So we know exactly what money's going to be spent. So at the moment, a lot of the East Auckland busway is going ahead, but there are some parts, but we really need to find out what exactly is happening with the shovel ready. But I think the council staff can probably answer that better. Thank you.
Deep level of
Can't hear
detail
you.
about that. I'm afraid we can't answer in a great deal of detail. There is some information on page 30 of the supporting information that shows there's still quite a substantial level of investment in the various major transport projects in the eastern part of the city. There's a reduction in the eastern busway expenditure, and that'll be a timing issue, so that'll still be proposing for that to proceed in the future. The other two areas of expenditure seem to have a similar amount of funding. We will endeavour to get an answer from Auckland Transport to the question on this, and we post the answers up, so that'll be available.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Cashmore, you'll recall that this question has sort of come up before in sort of different guises, referring to different things. It's been reworded this evening, and the question is along the lines of, in this emergency situation, has any consideration been given to selling the council shares in the Ports of Auckland or Auckland Airport? Councillor Cashmore, if you will.
Thank you, Eddie, and thank you for the question. It's a very important one. When you look at the ports and the airport, they are, multi-million-dollar assets that the council has held for a long time. Do we look at selling them? It'd be like almost at the moment, at these times of financial constraint, you'd be almost selling them into a loser's market. So, and I sort of view that the port and the airport shares as the assets of last option. It's almost like the silverware for your house. The ports is going through a big restructuring process at the moment through automation. And that's why the dividend is disappearing. It's taking up a lot of their OPEX spend and potential surpluses to bring in a very highly technical and highly capital intensive program of automation, which in turn will lift the port's productivity substantially, as we've seen in other international ports, Los Angeles, Copenhagen, and other European ports. And that will then return the dividends that we're used to, $50–60 million a year. Auckland International Airport, as we know, has taken a massive financial hit, 90–95% loss in traffic. Its impact on its cash supplies and its income is yet to be quantified. They're doing a lot of work on runway renewals that was being put off for quite some time, but a lot of other work's been slowed down until they come back post-COVID. So if you're selling an asset like now at a time of its income being suppressed, your price you're going to receive will be equally suppressed. So I suggest, no, let's keep these quality assets in the family cupboard until such time, and hopefully it never happens, that they are really needed. These are the assets of last resort. And I think there's so many other things that we can do that can still bring us through this position in a reasonably good space and in a reasonably good context to grow forward. Thanks, Eddie.
Thanks, Councillor Cash. Well, before I hand over to Andrew, who'd like to get in here, there's a question here about why are we cancelling citizenship ceremonies? Aren't they essential for welcoming new citizens? And then over to you. Thanks, Andrew.
So the citizenship ceremonies were basically cancelled during lockdowns levels 3 and 4, simply because of social distancing and the laws that had been passed by the government at that time. And once we come into level 1, I would imagine, I completely foresee that citizenship ceremonies, which are a really important part of welcoming New Zealanders to our community and to Auckland, will start up again. And I look forward to that because they are really great evenings to have and to see.
Thank you. Over to you, Andrew.
One of the questioners has asked, why don't we borrow more to help stimulate the economy? So the council is certainly looking at doing the most borrowing it can prudently do, but it isn't in the same position as central government in terms of our ability to do that. However, in looking at the sorts of borrowing and investment we are going to undertake, the council's looked very carefully at its capital expenditure program and focused on the projects that will have the most stimulatory activity on the local economy. And so that list of projects, you can see that where it's talking about what we will and won't be doing, and the supporting information has been selected focusing on which things will have the most positive flow-through effect, and our chief economist's been heavily involved in this, assisting the decision makers and looking at the proposals they'll put to the council. So there is a focus on stimulating the recovery in the capital program. But just to re-emphasise, we're not in the same position as central government to be able to do the sort of stimulatory borrowing and investment that they're able to do because our debt levels are more constrained than theirs.
Thanks, Andrew. While I've got you there, I've got a question here about, and it asks, why are building consents considered part of the revenue lost or lost revenue? Building consent costs should be self-funding, so should not be material to total cost reductions required. And I understand I'm now welcoming Mr. David Gurney to the conversation.
Thanks, Eddie. Well, we do get a lot of revenue from building consents, and in the past couple of years, there's been an unprecedented volume of both building and resource consents coming through to council. We are expecting that post-COVID, there won't be as many developments underway, mainly because of the basically drop in migration that we'll have. And so that will have quite a major impact on the revenue that we're projecting forward. That said, people will still be planning projects, and so there will be still, we expect good volumes through our regulatory section, but probably not at the same levels as we've experienced in previous years, and that we were forecasting in our original budgets when we did the long-term plan 3 years ago.
Thank you, David. I've got a question here. This is potentially one for the elected members or the SMEs. The budget mentions that the creation of the Community Safety Fund will be compromised. What does this mean? Will there be no CSF, and that's Community Safety Fund, or will it be smaller later?
I think that's probably one that the staff really need to answer. Thank you.
Apologies, we don't have the detail on that particular area available, but we'll make sure that we are able to get that answer up on the website. So you should be able to see that where the answers come up probably tomorrow.
Thank you. That'd be very helpful. Councillor Young, I've got a question here for you, and it just comes off of the back of our subject matter expert presentation, and essentially it's and I'll ask the same of Councillor Stewart as well. The notion of 2.5 versus 3.5, and if you think about the sense, if you like, the difference in terms of being a ratepayer or a community member. It might be small, so to speak, but in terms of how it affects our potential to deliver the essential services that our communities rely on, is it not seismic, the difference between 2.5 and 3.5% across 12 months across the whole of the Auckland region?
I think 2.5 much different, but actually it's quite important. First of all, as our Andrew that just mentioned, because we actually are different with the central government. We need to borrowing, and then the borrowing, the credit level, and the borrowing money depends on the revenue we receive. So that's reason, as previously already mentioned about, we lost the revenue from the non-rate revenue quite a lot. So, but we don't want to listen the people, all the Auckland feedback, and because even 1%, that looks like there's $1 per week, but the money we collect, first of all, we need to borrow more money to have a more capital investment, because Auckland in the past 10-20 years, the population is a huge increasing, and used to our infrastructure not enough. A couple years ago, we do have a planning and put lots of infrastructure, and then like a CRL, Central Rail Line, like in the east, the Amity, we need to pushing on. So actually, I through the document, I see the 2.5, 3.5. If we're talking about Amity in the eastern Auckland, that will be have at least probably 20 million loss, and then means there will be defer and delay the project. So I cannot say each one, but every money is count. But the difference is actually quite different. But people we can see on the booklet, and then but we still how to balance it is very important, because we cannot borrow too much, but we do need to borrow, and then we cannot increase the rate too much, but we do consider through the consultation and make a tough decision later on.
Thank you, Councillor Young. And I just want to coattail onto the back of that as well. Again, it's important that we hear from them which way that way that they would like us to go, and the service provisions that they would want prioritised. So again, to our listeners and viewers this evening, akhaveyoursay.nz/emergency-budget. Councillor Cashmore, were you wanting to get in there?
Thanks, Eddie. I think this is one of the critical questions that we have on each one of these sessions, and it's important that the public understand exactly what's at stake here. As I said before, these are unprecedented times. I'd just like to reel out some figures that actually spell this out quite clearly. So under both 3.5 and 2.5, and I'll cover zero at the end. So under 3.5 and 2.5, our debt grows through our set levels with the banks, which is 270%. We go to 290% for 1 year. And then we have a management back to 270% in the 21-22 year. So we would break our banking covenants for 1 year. The agencies we deal with, the bank agencies we deal with, are saying that because it's a short-term breakage and we have a managed return to our prudent levels, they are relatively relaxed about that. As far as the capital budgets are concerned, we initially, under pre-COVID conditions, we were planning on a record $2.6 billion build for CapEx. Post-COVID, we're trying to keep the CapEx up as far as we can. At 3.5% rates increase, there is $280 million worth of referrals, so a $2.3 billion build. Under the 2.5% rates increase, we have $345 million worth of deferrals and $2.2 billion CapEx. Under OPEX, at 3.5, there is $120 million worth of savings anyway. There's another $54 million. And at 2.5, that expands out to $75 million on top of the 120. Asset recycling remains the same under both proposals. However, a 0% rates increase, or 1 or 1.5, would mean that the capital program would disintegrate. There would not be one other than those things that are currently contracted. There would be no other capital projects that could be thought of. There will be additional savings required of substantial amounts in the hundreds of millions of dollars. There would be huge amounts of staff loss and salary cuts. We would have reputational risk, and simply because our revenue would fall away so far, the banks who we borrow money off and help keep our capital program going through their funds and their bond issuances, we would be probably in dire straits with our ratings and our lending potentials for the future. So 3.5, 2.5 are both doable. Beneath that, we start to delve into very, very dangerous territory financially, and would be beyond the prudent levels of sensibility. Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cashmore. That's very useful, very helpful as well. Councillor Stewart, off of the back of Deputy Mayor Cashmore's comments and the figures that he has so helpfully provided for us this evening, 2.5 versus 3.5, at the end of the day, what matters is that we hear from our community in terms of service provision and their thoughts, their concerns, their questions. Have you anything to add to this segment, Councillor Stewart, and then I'll move us on?
Yes, I think at the moment this is a really, really important time. COVID-19 has just changed everything. At the moment, where the Auckland Council is currently interviewing for a CEO, so it's really, really important that we get a CEO who is going to be able to reset the way that Auckland Council does things. When we first were amalgamated, the amalgamation was to find savings and to stop duplication. A lot of this hasn't happened, so I'm hoping that whoever we choose for the CEO is going to be very, very strong. They're going to look at the way to restructure the whole council, reset the way that we do things. Very difficult times. So yeah. So, and we have to remember that Auckland Council is really the powerhouse of probably New Zealand, and so we need to make sure that we start doing things a lot differently. There's been a lot of things that the public, when they have their say, they're not happy with the way that we've been doing things, so we need to listen to them. They may have some ideas, they may have some things where we can make some savings, and I think we really, really have to make sure we do the right thing by Auckland. So yeah, I'll be weighing everything up when it comes to my time for voting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. David Yerney, I notice a couple of questions that have come through here. Would you like to speak to some of those, please?
Thanks, Eddie. So yes, there is a question about what's happening to the airport to Botany Rapid Transit System. So there is still work that will progress on that route. We've budgeted $56 million worth of capital expenditure on that for next year. There is one part of it though which will be deferred, and that's the Puhunui interchange. So that will be shifted probably forward into future years, but there is still work happening on that rapid transit system from Botany to the airport, and that includes improvements to access to the airport too.
Thank you, David. David and Andrew, while we're at it, there's you'll recall that we broke down that $500 million revenue loss earlier on, and there's a question that comes through here based off of that question or earlier reflection. Why would the ports not pay a dividend? It could potentially even be a question for Councillor Cashmore.
Sorry, Eddie, I missed that. I was reading the other questions. I wasn't paying attention to you, like a naughty schoolboy.
Oh, that's no problem. I love an active panelist or participant that anticipates everything. It's just a question here. So there's that whole 60%, and then we broke it down. That's the $500 million. And there's a question here that says, that asks rather, why would the ports not pay a dividend?
Right, I tried to move that off before or cover that off before simply by saying as the ports pre-COVID, in fact, for 2 or 3 years now, has been going through a automation process, and they were paying a dividend around $45–50 million. The automation process is the 4 new cranes, very expensive pieces of kit, a lot of sophisticated technological systems to go in, and a lot of changing of how the port actually runs logistically. That has had a big impact upon the port's ability to generate a dividend because it's sucked up a lot of cash in this repurposing. However, this repurposing is critical because it's going to enable the port to have a far greater throughput going forward, and it means it doesn't have to increase its footprint. So the dividend loss is nothing to do with COVID, mostly. It's mostly to do with the automation process and the systems around that. There has been a bit of a knock-on effect coming out of Europe and China with the supply of goods and services but coming through on the ships, but that is small as compared to the automation costs. So the port will come out of this okay, and once the automation stuff is landed, it's up and working, it'll be back to business as usual with dividends are concerned.
Councillors, this is one for either any of our councillors this evening, and I suppose essentially the underlying crux of this question is, how about user pays? Will not user pays if we slap that onto all the service provisions that we provide? Will that not solve the problem? And I'm happy to delve into sort of a bit more detail, but essentially that's what this question is asking. User pays, is that a solution? Is that the solution? Might start with you, Councillor Young.
Depend. Just for example, the public transport, one bus can take the passenger. It's very hard to know whether that's one passenger or the full house. So user pay probably can comply for certain service, but probably not all of that. We can do further investigation or discussion for that.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart, any thoughts from you? User pays. Just bear with us a sec. We've just got a small glitch here. Councillor Stewart, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. For some reason it was muted. No, I think there is a place for user pays, but I think once again I'd like to hear from the residents and what they think we should be. I think we need to hear from them. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Got another question that's come in here. Any thoughts from you, Councillor Cashmore, on that?
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. It's a really good question, isn't it? And it's a philosophical question cuts right to the core of council's activities. So we have a degree of user pays now in the consenting, both resource and building consent areas, completely 100% cost recovery, and in inspections. But would we want complete nutter user pays on, say, going to the library and using and taking out a book? Or user pays on our parks, so you go and walk on the park with your dog in the morning, you've got to pay a couple of dollars to do that. Swimming pools, our leisure centres. Some do cost recovery through gyms and bits and pieces, but there's a lot of work that council does that is actually doing it for the good of the whole community. And it's a really, really difficult balance, I think. It's something that I'd really love to hear from the community about is, how much are you prepared to pay for the pleasure of using those facilities that council provides? You pay for your water and you pay for your wastewater. You pay for your rubbish, recycling, inorganic. You contribute to libraries. Parks are generally free. Sports parks are free. Playgrounds are free. And that's, should those things remain free or should we have a charge? That's a really key social question that we could be asking. So it's good on the person who asked that question. It's one that's challenging for all of us. And the end of the day, it's a political decision. Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you, councillors. That's very helpful. I've got a question here that asks, will council continue to support arts and culture at the level that has been paid up to this time? And I guess if I can dovetail or coattail on the back of that question as well, and feel free to pass, councillors, because I know that there's a big hui, there's a big meeting that you will ultimately at which you'll have to ultimately deliberate and make the hard decisions. But are there some facilities or things that are top of mind for you that you anticipate your communities would like to see maintained? And you mentioned it, libraries, parks, things like that. Councillor Young, anything top of mind for you? Or again, would you like to just leave it for the remainder, the remaining 2 weeks for our community to get in touch with us and let us know?
This background, I do concern the art cultural program because it's very important for Auckland. But under certain such situation, I think as you just mentioned, we would like everybody feedback on your consultation and let us have a further consideration or some discussion. But I personally quite support him, but we need a priority and also the percentage for the great community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Stewart, anything that you personally would either like to see prioritised, or any thoughts about what your community might prioritise for this consultation? Or again, would you go ahead?
Okay, I'd like to just see what the community actually want to prioritise, but something that Sir Barry Curtis, who was a wonderful leader for Manukau, one of the things he did for all the new councillors is he would have a list of, say, 1 to 17 of what you thought was really, really important to the running of a city. So, the core businesses. So I'd really like to see and hear from a lot of our community. I'd like maybe for them to find the top 10 priorities, and I think it's really, really important because we're going to have to reset, we're going to have to do things differently. I think local body, not just Auckland Council, I think local bodies all over New Zealand have started taking on very much a lot of central government responsibilities. We've now got into early childhood, gymnasiums, all sorts of things, and I think we need to weigh it up now, and we need to hear from the community. We need to reset, and I'd really welcome to hear from the community what they actually think, what business we should really be in. I'd like to hear probably the top 10 core things, which it's just for a couple of examples. You've got your roads, your rats, your rubbish, your water, your wastewater, that sort of thing. Things that are real core business, and what things are people prepared to have further down the list. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I notice that the SMEs are potentially looking into a question that's come through, so I just give them a bit of time to do that. I just remind some of our viewers or listeners this evening that if you've posted a question or asked a question and it's not necessarily been addressed, that could potentially be because it's a frequently asked question that we've addressed in some of our previous webinars, and you'll find those on our website. There is a question here, our SMEs, and if you'd like to look at that while I give the answer. So there's a question here about arts and culture programs being scaled back, or sort of what the effects will be. The response from our finance team is arts and culture programs will be scaled back over the year, saving around 450,000. Auckland Live and Auckland Art Gallery exhibitions will be reduced, equating to a $1.1 million saving. Awesome. Right, folks, I think we've given the question machine a really good go this evening, and we've had some really great responses from our subject matter experts and also our elected members who have either dialed in or are here in the room with us this evening. I think it might be appropriate to begin wrapping this conversation up this evening. So I just want to go around again to our elected members. Any final comments for the community that are listening or tuning in this evening, and potentially the wider community that will watch this when we've uploaded it to the website? Any final thoughts from you, Councillor Stewart?
No, just that I look forward to hearing from everybody, and I think it's really, really important that as a council we do listen. A lot of the time the public don't think we listen, but I certainly try to listen. I'm sure other councillors do as well. So looking forward to hearing from you all. And one other thing, anybody that would like to get in touch with me, my email and my mobile phone, if you want to text me, is on the council website, and very happy if I can meet you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Young, any final words, thoughts or reflections from you this evening?
Yep. Before COVID-19, East Auckland already facing the challenge of meeting the population growth through the investment in the infrastructure and the service. So it's very important we don't drop the ball on our future. We need to find a balance. So as the councillor just mentioned, we do need to listen everybody feedback, and also thank you the staff team this time provide a different language for the different the migrants for like Korean version, the Chinese community. The feedback I think so far is very strong. So I'm looking forward to hear all our Aucklander to give us the good feedback, and then we can discuss, make a tough decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Young. Any final words from you there, sir, in the Franklin District? Councillor Cashmore.
Thank you, Eddie, and thank you, good folk of the Howick and the East, for your questions and for your participation tonight. Auckland's a very changed ship. 2010 till now, our population has grown by 300,000 plus people. That population increase is falling away at the moment. At the same time, Auckland Council's taken a capital delivery program to fund previously shortfall legacy assets by the legacy councils to record heights. We have driven a capital program that was going to be $2.6 billion this year. Never been seen in Auckland before. Sadly, that's going to fall to 2.3 or 2.2 billion this year. However, that's still a pretty good result. It's relatively equivalent to what's been delivered this past year. People say we just need to borrow more money. Well, we have covenants with our banks, and because council is not a business like a private sector business like the ones that I'm involved in, where you can borrow against your asset base. Council's assets are roading, bridges, pipes, playgrounds, things that the community must have that are essential for life. So our borrowing is predicated on our ability to raise revenue. Hence that debt to revenue ratio of 270% being a critical factor. And loss of revenue then hence affects our ability to deliver a capital program. Hence the need for this quasi-austere budget. The challenge is the reality versus the popularism. And we need to be very, very clear that a 3.5, 2.5 is, it is that $80, $90 a year increase per household on average. It's still quite a bit of money. We need to hear on you what you think is the most sensible, pragmatic outcome for you, your community, and your city. And no one's going to pull any scarves over your eyes here and try and give you delusionary facts. We have taken what we believe is the most likely scenario from the hit from this COVID outcome. The Property Council is forecasting a 70% drop in commercial property builds and a 50% drop in residential. That is massive. That sort of prediction leads to the uncertainty that we have, uncertainty of the capital program that we want to deliver, that we're aiming to deliver, but we have to have variances in it. Uncertainty like for the ports with its dividend. The port doesn't know what its final books are yet. It says it's going to pay 20% of its after-tax profits to us. They haven't completed their books, so we don't know that figure. So we've got to take a fairly conservative approach to those numbers. And so taking on the other side, we might be wrong on the negative. Maybe things won't be as bad as being predicted, and we will come out of this. The most important thing is that we are heading in a good direction. Things won't be stopped, but things might be slowed down or deferred for a year. But when we come out of this, we need to be in a position that we are ready to go again and keep Auckland growing, improving our facilities and improving our quality of life. Maybe we're all going to work differently. You know, I've quite enjoyed doing my normal 10 or 12-hour days for my office at home here where I am now, and only going into council 1 or 2 days a week. That's probably going to ramp up to 3 or 4 in the very near future. But we can all do our bit to help alleviate traffic congestion, to alleviate pollution, and to still be productive and useful citizens of this city. I thank everyone who's been involved. Eddie, to you and your team, it's always great to work with you. To all the people who have written in and given these great questions, thank you so much. And to my fellow councillors, Councillor Paul and Councillor Sharon, your input and value to around our council makes it a better place to work and makes the city a better place to live. So thank you everybody for being involved. It's a privilege to be your Deputy Mayor. It's a privilege to be with you tonight. Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you so much, Deputy Mayor Cashmore. It's a privilege and an absolute pleasure to have you on our webinars, and thank you so much for your contributions this evening. Andrew Duncan.
On a final note, from a finance perspective, I'd invite you all to submit to help the councillors make the decisions about the levers to pull in setting this budget. Within the limitations on the borrowing that Councillor Cashmore has emphasised, the council's got a capital investment program. What are your views on where that should focus to best stimulate the economy and to maintain the services? Recognising the areas of savings the council will have to look at, and the impact that the 2 different levels of rates increase are having on the council's ability to deliver the services you've become used to. Noting that there'll be more material effects at 2.5%. Recognising also your views on the asset sales as quite a comprehensive list of things the councillors will be looking at. Let us know what you think about those.
Whaftai, Andrew. To our community who have joined us, journeyed with us also over the last couple of weeks and months, I want to echo the sentiments that the elected members have offered this evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in this evening and to ask the questions that you have asked. Again, the website is akhaveyoursay.nz, emergency/budget. Beg your pardon, I'll just read that out again. I shouldn't try and multitask while doing this webinar. The website, ladies and gentlemen, our community is akhaveyoursay.nz/emergency-budget. I also want to echo the thanks that have gone around the screen or the room this evening. Thank you to our comms team, our finance team, our IT team, and CE&I, everybody here at Council who has worked really, really hard to bring this webinar series together. Mā te wā, pō Mārie.